Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. Winner of the Best Film at the 1989 Fantafestival in Rome, Shinya Tsukamoto's breakout 1989 feature Tetsuo the Iron Man is a touchstone of cinematic cyberpunk, a relentlessly frenetic black and white 16mm assault on the senses and sensibilities, and a supercharged display of independent filmmaking. Written, directed, produced, edited, photographed, and art directed by its auteur, who also created the impressive, if rugged, special effects, Tetsuo has drawn comparisons to the work of David Lynch, David Cronenberg, Svankmajer, Ishiro Honda, and H.R. Giger, while remaining its own defiantly original beast. No catalog of descriptors can adequately communicate the fiery, almost violent energy that Tsukamoto brings to the screen. This is a genuine, pure cinema experience, one whose fairly straightforward, if fanciful narrative is so deeply layered within its powerhouse visuals and incredible sound design, aided immensely by Chu Ishikawa's industrial driving beat and bluesy torch songs, that becomes secondary or even tertiary to the proceedings. Instead, Tetsuo is a movie of moments, with one visceral, mind-blowing sequence giving way to the next, until the end credits roll game over and the viewer is left forever changed. The right film at the right time, Tetsuo is a feature unlike any other, and for that reason alone, deserves your time and attention. Love it or hate it, you won't soon forget it. It's time to dive deep into biomechanical nightmare fuel, and I have an incredible panel to chat about these films with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Michelle Kisner.
Hey.
Grant Kachan.
Hi.
And Jennifer Olson.
Hello.
And we are here to chat about Tetsuo the Iron Man from 1989, celebrating his 35th anniversary. And along the way, we'll chat about the sequels, Tetsuo 2, Body Hammer from 1992, and Tetsuo the Bullet Man from 2009. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and a welcome. So this is one that I think definitely, I want to hear everybody's origin stories, because hearing how this film came into your life is probably a good story. Jennifer, how about we start with you?
So part 2 was the first one that I saw. It was just a blind grab, because I looked at the cover and my now ex-husband and I were like, oh, this looks cool. We used to have friends come over for what we called spaghetti and gore nights. And we turned it on, and I don't think we talked through the whole dinner. We just sat there with our mouths open, not even chewing, like watching this craziness. And then we had to find part 1, of course, which was I thought even better. But that's how I found it anyway. It's just
cool.
Blind grab.
I think we need to institute a spaghetti and gore night as well. Yeah. Grant, how about you?
So I was at a party at an unnamed university in Cambridge in college. And in one of the rooms, they had it playing in the background while like some industrial music or Nine Inch Nails or something was just blasting away. And then there was this movie theater in Boston that shall remain unnamed that would routinely show midnight movies illegally that they shouldn't. Like they would have the for home use only, come up at the beginning. We would all applaud. And they showed that. And I was like, oh my God, that's the one from the party that they had. And it was one of those, it just like jaw dropped like that. What am I watching?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just absolute assault to the senses. Just like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, how about you?
So I saw it the first time in the late 90s. So I would have been 19 or 20. And that was back in I was super into Asian films, but it was kind of hard to get them. Like in the States, they weren't, So that was big in my, sorry to say, my bootleg and eBay days. You know, everybody
Hey,
had that
we got to
bootleg
see these movies.
Yeah,
It's
you had that
important.
one eBay seller that you like had all the good shit. So like you would, buy all, and it was a VCD. So I don't even have
Nice.
it anymore because it looks terrible. Any VCD I have, I've tried to rewatch it now. I'm like, what? How did I even see what was going on? But I guess maybe my brain filled in the details. I don't know. But so that's how I saw it. It had no subtitles, but you don't really need subtitles for it, honestly. But had no subs. It was raw, just like a VCD, and it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, like I'd never really seen anything like that before. So that's how I saw it for the first time.
Well, and I think when it won Best Picture at the 1989 Fantafestival in Rome, it screened without subtitles there and still won Best Picture. And you're kind of like, okay, that says something. I feel like I've had so many different experiences with Tetsuo because I saw it initially. It was one of those movies you're like, oh, you got to see this. You got to. Somebody recommended it to me, and I watched it on VHS. And at home, middle of the day, and I was like, what? And then they screened it, I want to say like the 2 a.m. spot at the Music Box 24-hour marathon in October, which is a great time to watch that movie because you're like, if you nod off, you're never quite sure. Am I dreaming this? Did I miss something? It's like, no, it's just insane all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the Solid Metal Nightmares box set came out that I see over Michelle's shoulder, from Arrow in 2020, I think is when it came out, around then. Being able to watch it with commentary by Tom Meese just gives it a whole nother spread of context. You realize, this mad genius that Shinya Tsukamoto is, and how he was creating these films. That was just a whole other level. So it's like, I feel like I keep watching this movie for the first time and having a whole new experience with it. Would anybody like to attempt a synopsis of Tetsuo the Iron Man? That's my contest for the day.
I would say a businessman does a hit and run on a metal fetishist and then proceeds to throw him in the back seat and take him for a ride. And then, it's a revenge movie in a way. It's a hit and run, and then it's a revenge.
Yeah, they dispose of the body and they proceed to... he and his girlfriend proceed to have sex while looking down at the presumed corpse.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the next day, our businessman has a little metal diode coming out of his cheek.
Yes, it does.
And things just start to unravel from there. I will throw up the spoilers banner, but as I was saying offline, even though you might know what happens plot-wise in this film, it is very much an experience.
Oh, yeah.
Visually, audio, etc. Let's speak to some of those elements, speaking specifically to the visuals. It's shot in black and white. It often is compared with David Lynch's Eraserhead. What struck you perhaps the first time you saw it or on this most recent viewing?
Well, it's one of those where it plays out like a music video. Like you don't necessarily need to have the dialogue and plot or the plot sort of explained through the dialogue. You have such a fantastic visual style going on through the entire thing, and it's so industrial and so raw and so squirm-inducing. Like when he's inserting the piece, you know what I mean? Like, you're getting sort of the squish and the glug and all that sort of sound, but you don't necessarily need it because you would feel it even if you weren't hearing it, But it's one of those, it sort of comes at you so hard with all of those visuals. And
That's
even
right.
there are moments of almost, I'm not sure if it is actually stop motion, but those moments of stop motion that he had, or stop motion-esque, that he has in there, mixed with the live action, mixed with that sort of animation of it all. It's so twisted in such a fantastic way. Even when things just keep getting weirder and weirder and weirder, you're like, all right, where we go next? Let's go. Okay, cool.
Michelle?
Like he was saying, I liked how raw it looks because I believe he shot it on 16 millimeter.
Yeah.
So it kind of loses a little bit of clarity, in that way. Even with the nice, transfer on the disc, sometimes it's just hard to see what's going on. And the metal and the organic flesh, they kind of meld together with the quick cutting, the zoom, the smash cuts. Like you honestly, very rarely know truly what's going on the screen at all times. There's very few long cuts in it, very few moments where the camera stops moving. So it just feels chaotic, like a dream, like flashes of imagery that you can't, it's so fast you can't really parse it. Your brain can't parse what's going on. That's why it takes multiple viewings, even just to put the narrative together, because it's like a visual onslaught, like constantly. And also, I like that. I don't know if Tsukamoto's ever specifically said that he was inspired by Akira,
Right.
but it reminds me of the third act of Akira, with when he starts can't control his power anymore, and metal and stuff starts coming out of him, and his arm starts like bleeding out, and then his body expands, and there's like machinery in it. It's almost like that part of the movie, but just stretched for an entire movie, like man being invaded by technology that they can't stop, like body horror style stuff.
Well, and there's a character named Tetsuo in
Yeah,
Akira.
yeah.
So I mean, I would not be surprised if he was inspired to lift that. Tsukamoto he's the writer, he's the director, he's the editor, he creates the special effects. Like, it is very much that auteur. He plays the fetishist who then becomes the monster. Jen, you talked a little bit about the visual when you saw it the first time. What was because you came to it having seen the color, sequel. How was it coming back to the black and white?
I love the black and white. The shadows and the graininess and the kind of punk style of it. Like Grant said, it's like a music video through the whole thing, pretty much. It's just nonstop assault on your ears with the amazing industrial music, and then the onslaught of the visuals coming at you constantly. I just watched it again this morning, and I still saw stuff that I didn't see before. The visuals are just amazing, especially in the black and white.
And very much speaking to sort of the punk aesthetic to it, there's a very DIY, sort of very independent feel to it. Like, it's, finding a bunch of actors they know that can just go and do and have a lot of fun with it. And they did.
And that soundtrack is Chu Ishikawa is responsible. And it has that, they draw comparisons to Nine Inch Nails because you get that kind of like hard industrial driving sound. But all of the sound effects are also kind of like in sync with the visuals that you're getting. And it does feel like it's not just, he's not just shoving the film into your eyeballs. He's like ramming it through the back of your head and hoping you hang in there for the ride. But he came from a theater background, and several of the people who are involved in this project were part of that kaiju theater with him as well. And that's also that kind of DIY quality, is that that's a real guy underneath a real, costume of, metal. That's the thing. I don't know what it was made out of, because it looks really heavy, but he basically becomes a monster. He becomes a kaiju because he's running around with this iron suit on. It was inspired by his, he did a short film called Phantom of Regular Size, which I like the idea of these being kaiju, which means, giant monster, but they're just regular size kaiju, they're human sized kaiju. When you did the synopses, Jen, that was great, by the way, because as Michelle said, like, you can watch this thing over and over again and be like, wait, who is that? And who are these people and what's happening? Because a lot of the story kind of unfolds in flashback. Like, we kind of like go, oh, that they actually are the persons who ran into him, and then they took him away in the trunk of their car, etc. So yeah, it's a mystery. And I think, like a lot of great auteurs, like David Lynch, perhaps, it doesn't seem preoccupied with spoon feeding the audience, with making sure that they get it.
Well, even if you were to sit down and read the Wikipedia plot of it and then watch it, you still necessarily wouldn't make that much sense out of it. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is as far as that moment of that piece of art. Like, I can tell you what it's meant to be, but it's what you find, or what you find on this viewing, that's really the most telling, for you individually.
I call those kind of movies vibe movies. Like, it's just a vibe. It's a feeling. It's an atmosphere. It's not necessarily meant to be a straightforward narrative telling a coherent story. And I think, you can piece it together as such if you try really hard. But I feel like he was more going for a feeling. And since it was made in 1989, I feel like there was probably a fear of technology advancing. That was just when things were starting to blow up. Also, I believe that was when Japan was going into their bubble economy as well. So they were just blowing up overseas with technological advances, and that was kind of their contribution to the international stage. So I feel like there's this fear of technology and man combining in a way that's not good, in a way that's horrible and terrible. It makes them less human when technology spreads all over, because like basically both of them together, they want to rust the entire world. Let's turn it all into metal and then destroy it with rust. And that's kind of like a fear of technology taking over our entire planet, which it did. And we're still scared of technology now. Now we have AI creeping up on us, even though they've written about 80 stories about how that's terrible, but we're still doing it anyway.
Did none of you see the Terminator?
I know. I'm like, we've already made documentaries, Terminator 2. Technology's still a fear for us, and I feel like that movie, technology almost feels like a disease that you can catch, maybe. And it's also, I think, maybe a little bit of fear of death, because if the more you combine your organic with the metal, the less vulnerable you are, the more protected you are.
Yeah, armor, right.
Yeah, it's like kind of like an armor of a sort.
And what's funny is like we would revisit that theme again, when we come to Ringu, talking about the fear of technology, that I feel like that's always kind of underlying Japan's social structure, is that they're built on technology, and yet there's this inherent fear of it taking over. What I find so fascinating is that, here's a guy with very little money. Obviously, they're working within a budget restraints. And yet this is not a film that feels like it's apologizing for its ambition. Like it's swinging for the fences with every single frame. And I have just so much respect for that. They had done their short film, Phantom of Regular Size, and then they'd done a 45-minute feature called Adventures of Taichu Kozu. And if you watch that film, it's on the same disc as Tetsuo on that Arrow video box set. You get to see a lot of Tetsuo influence there. And that was something I had not seen it prior to prepping for this show. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of that, what you were talking about, Grant, that kind of stop motion movement, where basically they are having a character move down the street, just step by step with a live action. And I don't know if they did that by stop motion or if they edited the pieces out. But either way, it makes for a very dynamic form of storytelling that this person gets from A to B, but you ever see them step. You just see them kind of like glide along the road, which is one of my favorite things about these movies. Yeah, he's like, and they have like little rockets, right?
Yeah.
On their boots. That technology and the embracing of the world building, the fact that like we get really deep. You talked, Jen, about, our metal fetishist. We don't know anything about this person. We meet them, and 2 minutes later, we see them inserting a pipe into their leg, and then things go from there. We get the retroactive explanation, such as it is, but he just tosses us in the deep end and expects you to keep up.
And what I find really, really interesting too is, like you were saying about him swinging for the fences the entire time with the first one. With the second one, where I feel like they've got a budget to be able to do a lot more that they want to do, it's not necessarily a better movie.
I mean, we won't leave Tetsuo right now, but in talking about comparing the two, because Tetsuo 2 came along in 1992, and people were wild about Tetsuo. It had run, pretty much in theaters for almost a year, and then was released overseas, and so had another life, and then was released in the US and had another life. So like there was interest in seeing Tetsuo. That was certainly something he could get funding for, but it's not the same film at all.
No, but it's interesting to see what he can do once they give him money. From an auteur sort of standpoint, that moment of, okay, I don't have to work within these limitations anymore. I can do all of those big things. And once he gets outside of those boxes of the limitations, he doesn't necessarily have to be as artistic, if that makes sense. His limitations are no longer where the artistry is really shining.
Michelle and I were talking offline. What was your impressions of Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer, which is the greatest title, by the way?
Well, yeah.
Body
Yeah.
Hammer. I'm like, oh, I
Clearly.
got to see this.
I feel like it's more, maybe it feels bigger and it feels like it has more on its mind maybe than the first film. The first film was a more singular, it's just like an obsession with man and metal and how they meld and what the result of that combination would be and how scary honestly it is. And Body Hammer feels more like an insular type of like self-critique maybe as an artist, like how far can you take your body? What are the ramifications of pushing yourself too hard? Which, you know, maybe that's what he kind of was on his mind, like after, like, especially if you make something like, you know, the first film and it becomes this huge hit, right? And everybody's like, what's he gonna do next? What's gonna happen next? And you have all this like pressure on you to outdo yourself or do something different, or, you know, and how that affects your art. I kind of got that vibe from it.
And Jen, you'd come to that one first. So what was your impression of Body Hammer?
I liked it. I loved the whole aspect of like this metal cult finding this guy and trying to enrage him to bring upon this metamorphosis. You know, I don't know. I just love the storyline of it. And now having children myself, seeing like how they kidnapped his son in that, I wish I could turn into a mechanical person and,
right,
you know, take out people if they tried kidnapping my kid. But
the idea, Michelle, you talked about like the auteur. I mean, apparently he started off with 60 crew members on this one. And by the end of the shoot, he was down to 20. So you get the idea that he's a little uncompromising. And that's how you get the vision that you get. But it's an intense birthing process, as has been the case in several of his films. You know, like when life is being brought into the world and it's a unique life, it doesn't come easy. And that's, I think, like the comparisons of him and Cronenberg, that idea of the body horror, I think those are absolutely right on target, but it doesn't feel like he's just aping Cronenberg. It feels like he's got his own things to say about technology and about transformation. That idea of transformation seems to be a theme he revisits often, as does Cronenberg.
I do think one aspect I would like to talk about is the just straight up horniness of all his films, basically, but especially the first Tetsuo. There's just like, and all the best art is like based on horniness, by the way. And I feel like, you know, the Salaryman, it's constantly focusing on his sexual urges, and he almost seems to be afraid of his own urges and afraid of women. And I love the part where he has that dream and he's getting pegged in the dream by a big metal, you know, like a metal tentacle from his girlfriend. And I love this idea of like him, like the technology and the metal inserting itself into him. Obviously there's kind of like hentai tentacle porn type, you know, aesthetics going on there too, but there's just this weird aggressiveness and like, and it explores male sexual aggression because, you know, later he gets the drill penis and he doesn't want to use it on her, obviously, because he knows it'll kill her, but it's almost like he can't help himself. He can't stop himself from pushing his sexuality onto her in this really grotesque way. But it's also fetishized. I can really tell that Tsukamoto has got a thing for metal and people and naked women and combining all these things together in sex. And I love when a fetish like that is just super inserted into somebody's work. I don't know. I just find it interesting and personal, I guess. All three of the movies have some kind of sexual elements to them, but the first one, it's really raw. I feel like to the forefront.
Oh, absolutely. And our actor who plays the Salaryman, Tomaro Taguchi, he was a punk singer. Tsukamoto recruited him into the theater, and then he was in his 45-minute feature prior to this one. But he's all of the actors are fearless in these films. He asks them to do great, big, emotional, demonstrative performances, and everybody just steps up to the plate and just cleans house. Kei Fujiwara plays his girlfriend, and she's another one that just doesn't care. There's no modesty to it. She's not afraid to go 100%. And I think that's true of everybody in this. The theatricality of the performances, it matches the visuals, right? If somebody was trying to be natural in these performances, it wouldn't work because everything is heightened so much. With regard to the color, the colored filters and things like that come into that he introduces for Tetsuo 2, I think some people they wanted Tetsuo again in a sequel. And so when he was looking to literally paint from a different palette, it was a little off-putting to some. I'm curious to hear, what people's impressions of Tetsuo versus Tetsuo 2 in terms of aesthetics, in terms of storytelling. I know I'm a huge fan of the first one, but on subsequent watching, I've come to appreciate Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer a lot more.
I mean, I'm in love with the black and white of the first one, but the second one, it still has almost a black and white feel. It's more blues and greens and grays and muted industrial colors, I guess you can say. Mm-hmm. And I really like it. The more that the more I watch it, the more I like it.
And Grant?
I would have to say that, I loved the first one. I really liked the second one. Even though my criticism is it's not necessarily better, I think that the visuals are fantastic. I think the plot's a little bit easier to follow as well.
Yeah, it's more accessible, right?
Yeah, it's a much more accessible film. And I think that if I were to sit somebody down and try to introduce them and they weren't necessarily a cinephile or something like that, or hadn't had all the gummies yet for the evening, then I would start them with the second one and then move them to the first. Yeah.
Michelle?
I like what Jen was saying, where it still has the feel of black and white. It's like just muted colors. It's a really strong blue palette, which is also kind of that era of film. That's kind of how they looked too. Just that whole era of film, there's a lot of blue-green movies, blue color palettes, cool color grading. I think it works in color. I think it's a little more interesting and dynamic. I think the reason we like it better probably in black and white is because that just works better with depicting metal, right? Because it really picks up all the little chips and cracks and the contrast between like the nuts and bolts and all the different little nooks and crannies and all that. It just feels more natural to depict metal, in more of a muted color palette, I think, than color. But I think it's shot really well. Yeah. And I also think that the special effects in it are fantastic too. Especially like, the drill coming out of his chest and like all the machinery that he sits in. It kind of includes more, because technology obviously had moved quite a bit ahead when he filmed that one. So it has a lot of like virtual reality type like helmet material stuff with the little wires coming out of it. It kind of made me think of Ghost in the Shell a little bit aesthetically. That kind of like, wires coming out of people. I want to say it's one of his better looking films, actually.
Well, as Grant was saying, I think it is a little bit more accessible in terms of storyline. It does feel like an artist who is maturing as a filmmaker, that he is still swinging for the fence, but he's got bigger bats to swing with now. The first one feels very kind of instinctual. It feels like he's tapping into something that's very primal, and he's less concerned about it being available. It is more just kind of an experience. It isn't something meant to be interpreted. You can interpret it should you so choose, but really it's about just kind of experiencing the assault on the senses. It is big, it's loud, it's fast. I mean, it's done in like an hour and change. That I think all is a different aesthetic. And then for him to kind of like go, okay, what if I were to take that story and tell it through a different lens? If I was able to provide a little bit more reason as to why this is happening, what's the end game here? Using those, I think those blue filters are just gorgeous. I think it's, as you said, Michelle, I think it's a great looking film. I think all of his films are really impressive on visual levels, even though the aesthetics change. And here we also get an outside element that is creating the Iron Man, as opposed to the Iron Man, it just kind of like coming from within, because there's no reason why a hit and run would turn you into an Iron Man.
Yeah.
It just happens. It's just something that happens like in a dream, like in a nightmare.
Something I noticed watching it today that I don't think I ever noticed before is at the end of the first movie, the fetishist makes a comment about how he's rusting and the other guy is not, and it was because his shaver was made of stainless steel when he got it in his cheek, and that's why he wasn't rusting. I did it. For some reason it slipped past me all the other viewings, and I saw it today, and I was kind of giggling about it because that bar that he shoved in him was looking pretty rusty to begin with. So
Yeah. Well, and something that I think Tom Meese mentioned in one of his commentaries is that here we're actually seeing the apocalypse. There have been a lot of films kind of post-apocalyptic, kind of like Akira. Akira is kind of like set in that kind of post-apocalypse, but here we're actually watching how the apocalypse went down. Here's how everything fell apart. I love that juxtaposition where we start off in a place of normality and we just watch things slowly spiral until we end up in the nightmare that is the end of this movie, where it's game over. And I love that game over is a motif that he returns to time and again.
I mean, I'd hate to like constantly bring up nuclear stuff with referencing Japanese films, but it does, it is inherent, I think, in a lot of them. But I can't help but think about how at the end when they combine together and they're like just one big hunk of metal, it just makes me think of when an atomic bomb hits a city. That's what rubble looks like. It literally melts metal, and it kind of melts it all together, and you can't tell what's going on anymore. Buildings don't look like buildings. A car doesn't look like a car. It just looks like a bunch of stuff put together in a blob. And then I just can't help but think like, destroying the entire world by turning it into rubble, essentially metal rubble, obliterating humanity in that manner. Just kind of like a little parallel, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Because what I see when I see them combine, also he gets rid of his girlfriend and he combines with another man. Like there's some definite homoerotic stuff going on there, but it basically turns into a giant penis if you look at it in the right way. Like I'm like, there's this big just rolling down the street. I think there's something to be said there in terms of gender politics. It's like, who's going to ruin the world? Men are going to ruin the world right down the road. And what you were saying, Michelle, like, I think that atomic element is absolutely in there because in terms of it being phallus, it also looks like a mushroom cloud, like in the same way that Godzilla does. If you look at him from the right angle, he looks like a mushroom cloud. And I think we're absolutely seeing that here because that was the ultimate technology being used to lay waste to the world. And so, of course, we're going to call back to it time and again, I think.
I guess I was just like also interested in comparing, Tetsuo Part 1 to Tetsuo Part 2, and Grant touched on this as well. The first Tetsuo movie it's considered one of those like Jishueiga films, like where I believe that translates to self-made movie. Where there was a lot of people making movies outside of the studio with their own money and their own equipment, because I think Japan was kind of going through a downturn in their theaters, and there wasn't a lot of money to go around for people to make films. I believe I would also like put like Burst City, which is kind of similar to Tetsuo in a way. It's kind of like this punk rock, really intense kind of post-apocalyptic like fuck you basically to society and also the studio system. That's the main difference between Tetsuo, the first one, and the second one, because the first one's made outside the studio system and the second one's made inside. It, of course, if you make something inside the studio, and you have to make it more accessible for it to make money. The producer's not going to let you make something real weird because he's like, well, that's going to alienate a lot of audience, and audience, of course, is money. So I feel like that's why these two films feel so different. Not to say that the second film is, I guess, compromised, because I feel like Tsukamoto wouldn't make something he wouldn't release something, I guess, that he felt really compromised in. But it just dampers it a little bit. It makes it less raw. It makes it less like a personal artistic expression, I guess, if you're inside the studio and outside the studio.
I agree. I don't see him as somebody who's going to compromise his vision. He's like, have you met me? This is the kind of movie I make,
Going back just a quick moment about talking about the post-apocalyptic thing and sort of that stereotype of it's Japanese cinema, and it's constantly talking about, the nuclear or whatever. At the same time, to be fair, if we're talking, 89 or late 80s, we're only talking 45 years since, not as an American, we should sit here and say, hey, get over it. But, it still was very raw, even, 45 years later for them.
Well, and I think that idea of repurposing metal, I think that is a callback to, it's like, okay, we are pulling ourselves back from destruction. We are putting our society back together. We are using the meager resources we have to make ourselves whole again. Like, I feel like that is a theme that he's exploring with the repurposing of the metal. Why the metal fetishist jams the pipe in, we don't know, but I think he's looking, for something. I think one interpretation is that he's trying to transform into something else. He's trying to build his body up so that it is more powerful, or just to have a different experience than the human experience that he's having right now.
Or so that he can withstand a huge traumatic event, like
right, building up his tolerance, building up his armor, things like that. I think there's a lot of stuff in there to dig into, in addition to it being just kind of an instinctive, aggressive, and visually and aurally stunning piece of cinema. If we do touch on Bullet Man, it came out 2009, which was 20 years after the original, and I want to say that in large part that may have been one of the reasons for its coming into being. Michelle, what was your feelings about Tetsuo the Bullet Man from 2009?
I literally watched that like 4 days ago. I also had not seen the third one ever, because, well, everybody always said it was bad, and not that stops me from watching it, but it just made me a little less excited to search it out, I guess. And B, it's like almost impossible to find. I actually have a not legal version of it that my friend gave me, and I was like, oh, hey, it's a perfect time to watch the third one. It's terrible. I'm going to be honest. Yeah. I think it's bad. I'm sorry. I mean, I know we're on a podcast talking about it, but I don't think it's a good movie. However, I think it has cool stuff in it. It has cool ideas in it. I was actually surprised that the main character in this one is white. He's not Japanese.
Right.
Which I didn't know that was how it was going to be. And it just made it a little more interesting. However, everybody's speaking in English.
Yeah.
Not everybody's first language is English, and then and it's just hard to understand. It's very stilted. The dialogue kind of doesn't flow as well as it might if he had written it in Japanese and performed it in Japanese. Tsukamoto has a big part in it, like he does in most of his films, but he has a large part in it. It's almost like a superhero origin film. It feels like it might have been influenced by the kind of start of the MCU and type movies and comic book movies. It feels more like a superhero origin film. It's got like mega shaky cam in it. You can hardly see what's going on, and not like in a fun, interesting way like the first film. It's like in a kind of nauseating. It's almost like they were filming and there was an earthquake happening like the entire runtime of the film, and like the camera guy is like barely fucking holding on, trying to like figure out what to like focus on. But it has like a kickin' rad 9 Inch Nails soundtrack.
Yeah.
The soundtrack is like A+ would buy vinyl of it. Like I was like, this shit rocks. Like the whole movie, I was like, damn, I'm glad this soundtrack's good. So I have something to focus on, because the rest of it was not like great. But what I also kind of found interesting about it is Tsukamoto is playing a character that's kind of trying to destroy Tetsuo in a way. So it almost feels like maybe that's him saying, I'm done with exploring this. This is like something that was in my past that I was really obsessed with. And now 3 movies later, I think I'm finally done with man and machine and this idea of Tetsuo, and I'm going to destroy it. So he kind of like in the film, like he's kind of like trying to get rid of Tetsuo. So maybe it's like kind of like a meta way of him saying, I'm finally finished with this as a concept, this specific concept.
Well, and it's funny because I think he does try to make it even more accessible to a broad audience. And it starts off with a couple, their son is run down in the street. The husband and the wife kind of like just spiral into misery. The father starts having this genetic shift because he's got a mad scientist for his dad, and he's loaded up with firearms. And that's kind of like you were saying, Michelle, like he is like a new superhero because he's out for vengeance against Tsukamoto's character, who's the one who ran the kid down. The fact that it's in English, and I notice this with a lot of foreign films, like certain things read better than they land the ear. There's a lot of techno speak in this one that if I was reading it, it probably would have gone down better. But hearing somebody try to say those lines, I don't know about this. But I think he still is, again, swinging for the fences. He has big ideas. It's one of those where I didn't hate it. I feel like it's a really ambitious experiment. I wouldn't consider it unqualified failure. Like you, Michelle, I find a lot of things in it that I'm going, well, that's cool and that's cool. In trying to make it more of a conventional movie, I think it loses something in that you're trying to like jam it into a place it doesn't belong. You know, like he needs to be able to play on a field where you might get some of this, you might not. It's okay. That's the invitation with the original Tetsuo, is just kind of like, here's a thing I made. What do you think? You either vibe with it or you don't.
There's no expectations, I guess, with the first film. And then third film, Tetsuo's already like a thing. So now he has to contend with people's, expectations of the thing,
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, it's like we when we come to Tetsuo, we're expecting a Tetsuo movie in the same, like when we were talking about Terminator earlier this year, nobody knew what Terminator was in the first one. We didn't know what the lore was. And now when we have Terminator 2, 3, 4, etc., well, we know what we want from a Terminator movie and we need to have X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you don't have any of that, you just get to play and be free. Any other thoughts on Tsukamoto's other work?
One of my favorites, I haven't seen it since my first initial watch, but I just bought it, so I'm going to watch it again, is Gemini. I really liked that one the first time I saw it. Of course, Snake of June, I also enjoyed.
Snake of June is great. Tell us a little bit about like what the story is for Gemini.
So
if you can,
about a doctor whose life is slowly wrecked by a twin that he didn't know that he had.
Yeah, Tsukamoto's big on twins and doppelgangers and duality. Michelle and I were talking offline how we used this panel as an excuse to kind of dive into that Arrow box set. And so what were some of the discoveries you found there?
Well, honestly, what I was going to talk about is like not on the box set.
Oh, that's okay.
It's his remake of Fires on the Plane.
I have not seen that one.
I believe the original was Kon Ichikawa directed it. I've seen the original as well. And the original, it's basically about like a troop that gets like stuck behind the lines and they start running out of food and supplies. And it turns out that they resort to cannibalism. And it's kind of like a guy trying to get from one spot to another, and like a soldier. And basically like it's like a tour of the war, right? Everything he sees and experiences as he's like, traveling across the land. And it's actually quite a funny film, oddly. It has a lot of humor in it. And Tsukamoto's version actually is like humorless completely. It's also way more gruesome. It really dives into the horrors of war and just like, like everything, almost everything he does has at least a little bit of body horror in it. And I guess the body horror in this film is more when your body isn't yours anymore. You don't own it because you've given it to the war, right? Like the government owns your body when you're a soldier. You don't own yourself anymore. I used to be in the military and they don't really come out and say that we own you, but they do. And they treat you like they own you.
Yeah, like you're their property.
Right. So like I guess the loss of body autonomy as a soldier, and when you discover that like your life means nothing and death means nothing, and once you're dead you're gone, and what did you give your life for? It's less of like a philosophical rumination on war like the original film. It's more of like a visceral, gory explosion of body parts and death and blood. And Tsukamoto plays the main soldier in it, and he's just fantastic. I actually don't like remakes that much, but that is one remake I thought was just as good as the original, just in a different way.
Cool. Thank you. I'm putting that on my list.
Oh, well, I have the same box set you guys do. And I rewatched the first two Tetsuos and then totally meant to continue watching them. And unfortunately ended up catching the last bit of Police Story, which then made me have to watch Police Story 2, which then led me to Super Cop, which then led me to First Strike. And then it just sort of fell apart from there. So I sincerely apologize for not doing all of my homework, but I am going to get to the rest of the box set eventually.
Well,
I've definitely fell into a Chan hole before. Don't feel bad. Like,
yeah.
watch
Oh no,
one,
it's
it
easy
just
to
keeps
do.
happening.
I mean, it just, yeah, and it, oh God, love them.
Well, and it's funny because that kind of indie go for broke spirit is very much, that is Jackie Chan, that is Tsukamoto, that is Takashi Miike. Like there is that sense of just try and stop me making a movie, folks.
Yeah, and try to stop me from just being me.
Yeah,
especially with all of those. Yeah.
Miike and Tsukamoto kind of came up at the same time. And
Mhm.
while Tsukamoto wasn't as prolific a filmmaker, they both were very much making their way in the video market and in feature films. One of the films, Haruko the Goblin, was Tsukamoto's second film. And that's a really fun, twisted monster movie that I highly recommend. And then his first kind of non-horror, even though there's definitely some body horror elements in there, is Tokyo Fist. And Tsukamoto plays, milquetoast businessman who his girlfriend starts leaving him for a boxer. And so he decides he wants to be a boxer as well. And again, we're talking about transformation. It's super violent. So while it's not technically a horror film, there's definitely some gore, and you get to watch the punishment the body can take. Highly recommend that. And then Snake of June, which is also on that box set, is, I would say, Tsukamoto kind of at his most elegiac. There's not a lot of shaky cam. There's some beautifully composed shots, filters, really great performances, but not heightened. They're more realistic, naturalistic. It's wonderful to kind of have been introduced to this punk rock auteur, but also see that he has more stories to tell and different tools to tell them with. Even though Tetsuo, I think, will always be kind of his trademark film in the way that, David Lynch didn't just keep making Eraserhead over and over. Tsukamoto has also not made the same movie over. Cronenberg has not made the same movie over and over. It's nice that this is a gateway to watching an artist grow and mature. Any final thoughts on Tetsuo, on Tsukamoto?
Get out there and watch his stuff, definitely. Introduce it to people who do not know Japanese horror, body horror especially. That's fun.
I would mirror that same sentiment. That, show it to somebody and tell them nothing about it. Do not give them any warning whatsoever. Just toss it in and watch what happens. Yeah, that's it.
On that note, I think horror fans tend to be a little more adventurous than your average movie watcher. And so I would say, especially younger horror fans who might not have seen this before. Back when I was contemplating a sequel to our book Hidden Horror, I knew Tetsuo was one that I wanted to have in the mix, because I think it is a way to introduce somebody to something different, something they haven't seen before, and something that challenges them, but in a really exciting way. Michelle?
Honestly, I just agree with everybody here. It's a great movie to introduce somebody to weird horror. Also, it's like short. I think it's like an hour and like 7 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot of a time sink or anything. It's also cool to and I've done this before. It's also cool to just put on at a party, background visuals, and then you put some kick-ass music on. Everybody's drunk, and it's funny because anytime I've ever done it, people will be talking and then they'll see it and then they'll slowly start filtering in, and then 20 minutes in, everybody's on the couch.
Becomes a watch party. Yeah.
So I think it's a good way to maybe sneak attack some people with it. Just throw it on at a party.
How I was introduced to this film was my friend John Kitley of Kitley's Crypt. And the way he was introduced to it is that he was walking along the aisles of a horror convention, and somebody had scenes from Tetsuo up on their laptop, and he was walking by just as the drill dick scene was going on. And it's if that's not going to stop you in your tracks, nothing will. And he immediately bought his copy. He's like, if there's a movie with a drill dick in it, I got to have that.
So take my money.
Exactly. And then he, like any good guy, he passes it on to his friends and says, you also need to experience this. And so to anybody who is unfamiliar with Tetsuo, please go check it out. And if you are familiar with Tetsuo, introduce it to a friend today. Thank you all so much. This is an awesome conversation. I was really looking forward to this, and it did not disappoint. So looking forward to having you all on again very soon. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.